When I'm testing you. Okay, yeah. In clear, clean stereo. Some of us of a certain age would probably remember quadraphonic. Remember that was the big rage? Oh, yeah. Surround sound. Yeah. Talk about a phenomenon that just really went bust in no time flat. First, they were making a big deal out of it, and then they didn't. It's kind of like, this thing ain't moving. It's not selling anything. Let's just give it up. Good heavens. Well, uh, Colonel Hogan, could you pray us in? I don't know about you, but when you take antihistamines like Benadryl or whatever, find yourself drying up. Yeah. So, yes. So if I start speaking hoarsely, it's that's why. Anyway, good to have everybody here, and it's good to, especially those of you who are with us here in the auditorium, as well as those of you who are watching online. Thanks for watching. Anyway, we are at chapter 21 in the book of 2 Samuel. We've been in here for a while, but we are going to land this plane. It's. In fact, we're coming in. They're doing the signaling things in terms of okay, put your put your wheels landing wheels out. Uh, so we're at a section. I'm going to back up a little bit from last week. But as I mentioned last week, the last four chapters of Second Samuel read almost like an appendix because overall, most of the narrative in these books has been roughly chronological, at least. You get to these last four chapters in Second Samuel, and it's kind of like, oh, I forgot to mention this. And of course, unlike today, where you can go in and do a cut and paste, you really couldn't do a cut and paste back then. You just kind of had to add on. So the the writer of Second Samuel felt this is stuff that needs to be passed along so that people are aware of it. Uh, but it's I can't go back because the the ink is still drying on the parchment, and I might smear it or something. So he adds these little episodes at the end of his narrative. Uh, like I say, they're not necessarily in chronological order. They may not necessarily follow in a time pattern what we have just read up to this point, but it's at the very least it's interesting, and probably it's very important because there are some that it provides some insights into the life of David. It also provides some insights in terms of how seriously God takes certain spiritual laws, such as uh, if you go into the first part of chapter 21, we have what uh, if it strikes someone on a first or casual reading as kind of a very offbeat, maybe strange story, but uh, David is put in a position where he has to take vengeance on some fellow Israelites because of something that happened that he was not responsible for. And it starts out in chapter 21. David figures what the problem is after going through after the nation has encountered or suffered through a famine for 3 successive years. 1 year, hey, it happens. Uh, excuse me. Weather patterns change. You get these shifts. In fact, in our weather pattern, we're transitioning from a La Nina, which basically results in drier than normal weather for us. We're transitioning now into an El Nino, which is wetter than normal. And we've kind of seen a little bit of an example of what wet weather looks like after a long time this past week. You know, I'm sure several of us have gotten at least an inch or more of rain over the past few days. Well, not so much for Israel. It's dry times, and you know what dry times mean. The crops don't grow very well, if at all, and of course, it has all sorts of other negative effects, like on your livestock, on and pretty much on a lot of other things. So 1 year is bad enough. When 2 years is even worse. 3 years, David's thinking maybe God's trying to tell us something. So yeah, he inquires of the Lord. And the message comes back, well, you know what? There's something that Saul and his relatives and his henchmen did that I do not approve of. And it had to do that he, during Saul's reign of, basically the part of Saul's reign was a reign of terror against the Gibeonites. Who are the Gibeonites? Never heard of them. Well, they're a group of people. They are not Israelites. They're actually they were part of the land of Canaan that were marked for uh, good riddance by God. Uh, they were clever enough to see what was coming their way, and they fooled Joshua and his leaders into making a contract with them. Say, hey, we've come from a long way. We need your help. Uh, why don't you protect us, and we'll be your servants. And it's only after they signed the agreement that Joshua and his men realized that, hey, no, these are not, they fooled us. They didn't come from a land far away. They were right here in Canaan. They were part of the extinction program, and they fooled us. Well, even though they fooled Joshua and his team, they made a promise. In fact, they swore an oath to the Lord that, yeah, we'll protect you and we'll take care of you, and you don't have to worry about anything. And so you can imagine the memo that Joshua sent out to his staff. You know, note to staff from now on, the next time you're asked to make an agreement with anyone or anything, check with God first, because we want to make sure that we're not messing anything up. Well, apparently Saul came in and disregarded that agreement, and he and his supporters and several relatives, perhaps, started this campaign of terror. Basically, we're going to get rid of the Gibeonites. They fooled us. They're not neat people. We don't want anything to do with them. And besides, God marked them for extinction anyway. We're just going to go ahead and do that. Well, that was not the plan. The plan had changed, and the plan had changed because, along with swearing of an oath to God that, hey, we won't bother you. We will protect you. We'll look out for you. So David goes and talks to the heads of the Gibeonite clan and basically say, what can we do to fix this for you? And the Gibeonites could have asked for just about anything. They could have said, hey, you know, uh, you killed 500 of our clansmen. We want to kill 500 of your Israelites. They didn't do anything like that. They also said, we don't want money. We want a symbolic payment. Give us seven of the relatives from the house of Saul, so that we can put them to death, and that'll solve the problem for us. So David agrees to do that, and he picks out 7 of Saul's relatives. He spares Mephibosheth because of the agreement that he made with Jonathan to bless him and his household during his reign. But here are these 7 relatives of Saul that are handed over to the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites hang them or execute them in some way where they all die at once. And then we see the aftermath of that execution. There's a woman named Rizpah who is related to the house of Saul. In fact, she's the mother of 2 of the victims. She knows what's going to happen. Not only are these people going to be killed, they're not even going to be given a decent burial, which in the custom of the day is a fate worse than death. Is there anything worse than dying? Well, according to this line of thinking, yes, there is. They can just leave your body out unburied, and open to whatever hazards come its way. You know, the nature's cleaner uppers, the buzzards and so forth, can come in and start to work on your corpse. And you know, that's nobody really wants to see that happen to anybody. But it's the ultimate disrespect. Okay, not only do we kill you, we don't even bother to give you a decent burial. Well, mom here by the name of Rizpah sits with the bodies. She watches over them and she shoos away any of the critters that would presume to come in and have lunch on the corpse. And she stays there until the beginning of the barley harvest. And also, it begins to rain, which kind of tells you that, okay, the problem has been solved. Whatever the issue was, David has dealt with it. He's answered the need and the expectations of the Gibeonites, and it's begun to rain again. David does one other thing as well. He knows that the Gibeonites are not going to bury these individuals. But just because the Gibeonites don't want to do that, just because the Gibeonites want to show the ultimate disrespect, doesn't mean that David has to do that. So David gathers up basically the remains of these men. He also gathers the remains of Saul and Jonathan, who were buried in another place. He brings them all together and gives everyone a proper burial. And after that, verse 14, God answered the prayers on behalf of the land, which meant that the 3 years of drought and the 3 years of famine ended. The rains came back. With the rains, you can grow abundant crops. You have all sorts of benefits and healing that comes to the land. And so, problem solved. It's kind of a, yes, when you read this, it kind of strikes you the wrong way. Gee, here is someone uh, paying for someone else's sins. Well, gee, was there someone else who's done that over time? Well, you know, uh, that's our situation with regard to Jesus. What did Jesus do? He died for our sins, and he didn't deserve to die, but he paid the price anyway. That you could almost see this as a foreshadowing of the grace of God. Well, let's go on to chapter 21. And the rest of the chapter has to do, basically, it's kind of like a random collection of battle stories. They all have to do with the Philistines. And we know that for most of David's reign, he really did not have all that much problem with the Philistines. Now, there may have been some spot battles and so forth, and there probably was, because there's going to be some hints here that at least one of these battles occurs late in David's reign. But we know that the Philistines have been the traditional enemies of the Israelites. And that's not the only thing that these battles with the Israelites and against David have in common. They also have to do with giants in the land. Remember who David's first big battle was with? That was with Goliath, the guy who I think was, 9 feet tall? Really big dude. Well, they grew him big in this particular town. I think the name is Gath. And apparently, we have a situation where some of Goliath's relatives come to do battle again. So here we are at verse 15. Once again, there was a battle between the Philistines and Israel. David went down with his men to fight against the Philistines, and he became exhausted. Now, this theoretically could have happened at any time, but knowing what we know about the reign of David and how long he reigned, and that as time went on, he got older and older, and we all know what happens when you get older and older. The old body ain't what it used to be in terms of stamina and so forth. David became exhausted. And Ishbi-Benob, one of the descendants of Rapha, whose bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, that's about 7.5 pounds, pretty hefty, and who was armed with a new sword, said, "I'm going to kill David." He's having a good day and he's feeling pretty confident. So he makes that pronouncement. Unfortunately, he forgot to check with Abishai, one of David's mighty men, because verse 17, Abishai, son of Zeruiah, David's nephew, came to David's rescue. He struck the Philistine down and killed him. Then David's men swore to him, saying, "Never again will you go out with us to battle, so that the lamp of Israel will not be extinguished." David, you've retired from active duty. You can go out, you can do anything else you want. You can strategize, you can advise, you can go on the cable news channels and give commentary. They probably didn't say that. But you can do anything that you want to except go out and fight, because from what we've seen, no disrespect intended, but if you go out and get killed, what is that going to do to us as a nation? So David, you stay behind the fighting lines. We'll do the heavy lifting. We'll do the heavy duty stuff. But you stay in a protected place. So David, not being probably not being the spring chicken that he was several years before, he accepts that advice, apparently, because there's never an issue, apparently, of David saying, "I don't care what you men think, I'm going to go out and lead you guys into battle." Well, there are other battles, again with the Philistines, and again with giants who come from this particular community. In the course of time, there was another battle with the Philistines at Gob. At that time, Sibbecai, the Hushathite, killed Saph, one of the descendants of Rapha. In another battle with the Philistines at Gob, Elhanan, son of Jair, the Bethlehemite, killed the brother of Goliath, the Gittite, who had a spear with a shaft like a weaver's rod. Now, the translation of the original Hebrew is a little bit inelegant here, because we don't know whether the guy is trying to describe the particular spear that the brother of Goliath had, or whether he's making a reference back to Goliath's original spear, because this is the same language that was used back in describing the battle with Goliath of the huge weapon that Goliath exhibited. And then there's one more battle, and still another battle, verse 20, which took place at Gath, Goliath's hometown. There was a huge man with, get this, 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, 24 in all. Wow, that's weird. That's not something you see every day. It's unusual, but apparently it happens. If you get the chromosomes in the right order at the right time, you can produce a human being that has 1 extra digit on each of his hands and feet. And apparently, this is what this guy was best known for. He also was descended from Rapha. When he taunted Israel, Jonathan, son of Shemiah, David's brother, killed him. These 4 were descendants of Rapha in Gath, and they fell at the hands of David and his men. So David and his mighty men were giant killers, literally. Started with Goliath. And then we move on to chapter 22. Looks like poetry here, doesn't it? If you read it, and if you've ever spent much time in the Psalms, gee, this language looks very, very familiar. Well, in fact, it's kind of, sort of, Psalm 18 with a few revisions here and there. Is it worth reading? Yeah, probably so, because it's very likely that Psalm 18, whenever the original version was written earlier in David's life. In fact, chapter 22 opens with David saying to the Lord the words of this song when the Lord delivered him from the hand of all his enemies and from the hand of Saul. So that could have been right at the outset of his reign as king of Israel. This also could have been written at any other time, especially later in life. David could have taken that original manuscript, and as he's looking back and reflecting on his life and how God has led him through and protected him and saved him from all the calamities and hardships that he had to deal with. He says this psalm, this song of praise, works for me just as well now and at this stage in my life as it did earlier. Well, let's look through it because a lot of it really is beautiful language. Verse 2, David said, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. The Lord is my rock in whom I take refuge. He is the one in whom I will trust, my shield and the horn of my salvation. He's my stronghold, my refuge and my savior. From violent people you save me. I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise and have been saved from my enemies." That's the NIV translation. I kind of prefer the King James or the New King James, which says, "I will call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies." The waves of death swirled about me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called to the Lord. I called out to my God. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came to his ears. The earth trembled and quaked. The foundations of the heavens shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it. He parted the heavens and came down. Dark clouds were under his feet. He mounted the cherubim and flew. He soared on the wings of the wind. He made darkness his canopy around him, the dark rain clouds of the sky. Out of the brightness of his presence, bolts of lightning blazed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven. The voice of the Most High resounded. He shot his arrows, scattered the enemy. With great bolts of lightning, he routed them. The valleys of the sea were exposed, and the foundations of the earth laid bare at the rebuke of the Lord, at the blast of breath from his nostrils. He reached down from on high and took hold of me. He drew me out of deep waters. He rescued me from my powerful enemy, from my foes who were too strong for me. They confronted me in the day of my disaster, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a spacious place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. The Lord has dealt with me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands. He has rewarded me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord. I am not guilty of turning from my God. All his laws are before me. I have not turned away from his decrees. I have been blameless before him and have kept myself from sin. The Lord has rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanness in his sight. Now, based on what we have discussed and studied in earlier weeks, you might read that passage and say, "What you talking about, David? Hey, what was this thing that you were doing going on with Bathsheba? And what'd you do to Uriah? That's not exactly sinless, righteous behavior there, don't you think?" David would agree with you, I'm sure. David's point here is that no, David did not live a sinless life. None of us live a sinless life. But he knew he was forgiven. In fact, when he was confronted with his sin, Nathan the prophet told him, and when David confessed his sin, the first words out of Nathan's mouth was, "The Lord has forgiven your sin. You will not die as a result of it." So David knew he wasn't sinless. He just knew that he was forgiven and that the Lord loved him. And this is also someone who has lived, who basically wound up experiencing the consequences of his sinful behavior. I mean, he saw his children, his sons being murdered. He saw all sorts of terrible things happening to his family. Uh, he had to run for his life when Absalom tried to overthrow the government. And yet he saw how God sustained him during that probably the worst moment of his life. He sustained David just as he sustained him when Saul was after him. He protected him, and David is grateful for that. I like this next passage here. Very perceptive. David says, verse 26, "To the faithful, you show yourself faithful. To the blameless, you show yourself blameless. To the pure, you show yourself pure. But to the devious, you show yourself shrewd. You save the humble, but your eyes are on the haughty to bring them low." Gee, that's one aspect of God that maybe we don't think about all that much. But basically, what David may be trying to say here is that if a wicked man tries to outwit God, you can't outwit God, because if you try to do it, God will outwit that man. And it also kind of calls to a verse that we see at least 3 times in the Bible. I'm quoting here from James chapter 4, verse 6. "God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble." If you're a proud man, especially if you're a proud man who's going out harassing God's children, God will take care of that man, and he will uplift and sustain you during your time of trouble. Verse 29, "You, Lord, are my lamp. The Lord turns my darkness into light. With your help, I can advance against a troop. With my God, I can scale a wall. As for God, his way is perfect. The Lord's word is flawless. He shields all who take refuge in him. For who is God besides the Lord? And who is the rock except our God? It is God who arms me with strength and keeps my way secure. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He causes me to stand on the heights. He trains my hands for battle. My arms can bend a bow of bronze. You make your saving help my shield. Your help has made me great. You provide a broad path for my feet so that my ankles do not give way. I pursued my enemies and crushed them. I did not turn back until they were destroyed. I crushed them completely, and they could not rise. They fell beneath my feet. You armed me with strength for the battle. You humbled my adversaries before me. You made my enemies turn their backs in flight, and I destroyed my foes. They cried for help, but there was no one to save them. To the Lord, but he didn't answer. I beat them as fine as the dust of the earth. I pounded and trampled them like mud in the streets. You have delivered me from the attacks of the peoples. Another translation of that line is, you've delivered me from the strivings of my people. And certainly David had political issues with the people of Israel, and even in his own household, David was delivered from that. You have preserved me as the head of nations. People I didn't know now serve me. Foreigners cower before me. As soon as they hear of me, they obey me. They all lose heart. They come trembling from their strongholds. The Lord lives. Praise be to my rock. Exalted be my God, the rock, my Savior. He is the God who avenges me, who puts the nations under me, who sets me free from my enemies. You exalted me above my foes. From a violent man you rescued me. Therefore I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will sing the praises of your name. He gives his king great victories. Another translation of that line is, He is the tower of salvation to his king. He shows unfailing kindness. He shows mercy to his anointed, to David and to his descendants forever. Very powerful psalm. In fact, that's one that maybe we should spend some time reading again and again, because I think you can kind of pick things out of your own experiences, and you can kind of say amen to some of these passages where God has been our deliverer and our shield and our protector. Anyway, that's the end of chapter 22, and we're going to end our lesson at this point. Next Sunday, we will pick up and look at the last 2 chapters of 2 Samuel. More, oh, by the way, did you know this kind of stuff? There's going to be kind of a roll call, an honor roll, if you will, of the names of great men who served under David. We'll try to capsulize that in some interesting way. And then 2 Samuel will end with a very interesting, maybe a little offbeat story that is still significant. And then that will be followed by, I will do kind of a Paul Harvey rest of the story kind of thing, because 2 Samuel has this end suddenly with, hey, is that all there is? What happened here? What happened to a lot of the main characters that we spent a lot of time with? Whatever became of them? Well, we'll talk about that. So you'll have some kind of a sense of the outcome of the story that we've been studying for so many weeks. Anyway, thank you for your time and attention. I hope you enjoyed this particular lesson. Hope you got something out of it. Wish you a good week. Let's continue to pray for rain and enjoy it when it comes. And also pray against any kind of flash flooding. We don't like that. But if you will, read those last 2 chapters of 2 Samuel, and Lord willing, we'll be back here and see you next Sunday. Thanks a lot.